This week at Bungie, we've already gotten a ton of news about the future of Destiny 2's Crucible, some incoming content thanks to Joe Blackburn over on Twitter. But in the TWAB this week, we're also going to be learning a lot about some incoming Sandbox changes that are, well, pretty impactful to say the least. What's going on, Guardians? My name is The Black Link, and today is Thursday, August 5th, 2021. You know what that means. It's time for another issue of the Bungie Weekly blog, This Week at Bungie. And like I said before, this one is going to be all about upcoming changes. Let's go ahead and dive on in. First things first, we did have a major Twitter thread go out from Bungie Assistant Game Director for Destiny 2, Joe Blackburn. In this, he talked quite a bit about Crucible and the development going on around it, and some things that we can expect to see moving forward. It was a long Twitter thread filled with tons of information, but it basically breaks down to this. We're going to be getting more information about Crucible changes on the big expose happening on August 24th, which of course is also the day that Season 15 will be going live. In Season 16, we're going to get 2 reprised Destiny 2 older maps brought out of the vault and back into the game. They had to be rebuilt basically from the ground up to work with the new engine, and that's why it kind of took a bit of a long time to actually get these things out. In Season 17, we're getting a brand new map. And then in Season 18, we're getting more reprised older maps. We've also got new game modes in development that we'll be seeing sometime in the future, and possibly the return of the Rift game mode in Destiny 2. That's the long short of it, but of course, if you missed out on Joe Blackburn's tweets, I'll have a link to those down in the description box below, where you can also find a link to the TWAB. Now, with all that being said, let's dive on into some of the major Sandbox changes covered in this week's TWAB. First up, we're going to be seeing some melee changes starting in Season 15. Here's what Bungie had to say. Starting next season, you'll be able to bind your charged melee attack and your uncharged melee attack to separate inputs, giving you greater control of when you use your abilities. This is an opt-in feature, and these new actions will be unbound by default. When you go to customize your controls, you'll see the following new entries in the action list. Auto Melee is the new name for the melee action that you're used to. Your melee is context sensitive, and its behavior will change based on your equipped ability and of course your proximity to enemies. It usually does its job well, but will occasionally betray player intent. Essentially, like if you're a hunter and you mean to throw a knife, but you get too close to the enemy and you just do the stab instead. That's essentially what that's talking about. Next, Charged Melee is a new action that will always activate your charged melee ability upon button press, regardless of whether an enemy is in lunge range. Pressing the input when your melee ability is not fully charged will perform no action and cause the melee ability icon to flash red, similar to how grenade abilities work. And then finally, Uncharged Melee is a new action that will always activate your uncharged melee even when your charged melee ability is fully charged. Bungie goes on to say that this is going to be a straightforward system, but there are some things to note. Melee attacks trigger as soon as the button's pressed, not when it's released. Melee attacks don't wait to see if you're still holding the button before starting. This means you can't set any of the melee actions to a long press or a double press input. Game controllers will always have a limited number of inputs, so you may need to get creative with how you map your controls. Personally, I like to put charged melee on RB or R2 and uncharged melee on the right stick click or R3. This doubles up the finisher and uncharged melee actions on a right stick click, which will prioritize finishing enemies over meleeing them if the enemy is in a finishable state. If you assign charged melee and uncharged melee to the same input, it will always prioritize the charged melee over the uncharged melee, which is the opposite behavior of the auto melee action. And then of course you'll be able to find the settings for these key bindings within the normal settings menu underneath your preferred input options. So whether you're playing with mouse and keyboard or controller, you'll be able to find those settings there when this goes live in Season 15. Ultimately, some interesting changes. I think it's a nice quality of life change, especially for people out there, like I said, hunters, who really don't want to get their throwing knives mixed in with accidental melees when one enemy happens to, jump in front of you and take control of your aim assist. Definitely a good change. But next up, we've got some long-term ability changes, which is going to include an incoming Season 15 balance pass. First up are changes coming to Stasis Freeze. In Season 15, Frozen players can now initiate their breakout while airborne, and they've shortened the breakout animation and camera transition. This means that once you decide to break out, you'll be able to fight back sooner. And they've differentiated long freeze and short freeze visual treatment to make each status easier to identify. Some big changes there. Next up is a major change that I was not expecting to see, a nerf to sliding. While sliding, players now incur the following weapon penalties: minus 20 stability, plus 15% shotgun pellet spread, and 1.5 times flinch. This is actually going to wind up being a rather huge nerf to slide shotgunning, which I think is probably, that was the intention here, to nerf that. And it definitely comes as a big surprise to me. I don't necessarily agree with nerfing slide shotgunning this much, but as with all changes, I'm going to have to play around with it and see exactly how much it affects my playstyle moving forward. But it's definitely not something that I was expecting to see. Next up, we've got some of the class-specific changes. First up, for Titans, Rally Barricade is seeing a bit of a buff. Standing behind the Rally Barricade will now also provide the following weapon buffs: plus 30 stability, plus 10% range, and minus 50% flinch. They basically took, I think it was Guerrilla Fighter back in D1, supercharged it, and have added it to the Rally Barricade ability. Good, that needs more play. But it's not the only Barricade that's seeing a buff next season. All Barricades are going to be getting some other changes as well. First up, players moving at high velocity will now take more damage when moving through hostile Titan barricades, and barricades now slightly protrude into the ground to better protect the Titan's feet on uneven ground. This should reduce instances where explosives and projectiles are able to sneak through the bottom of the barricade and hit the Titan. Pretty major changes coming to that class ability there. Next up, we've got some changes coming to the Titan Behemoth class. First up, we've got Cryoclasm. While equipped, Base Slide now shatters crystals and frozen enemies, and they've increased the duration of the FX, notifying players that Cryoclasm's long slide is ready from 1 second to 4.5 seconds. Then for Shiver Strike, they've increased the movement speed by 25%, and for Whisper of Rhyme, they fixed a bug where the overshield provided by Whisper of Rhyme was not scaling precision damage correctly. Essentially, Bungie feels they overdid some of the movement nerfs that they did to the Behemoth class in their previous major nerf, so they're giving some of that back here. Buffs are something that's always pretty nice to see. Next up, we've got Middletree Sunbreaker. Throwing hammers seeing a change. They've increased the time before hammer explodes after hitting the ground from 6.5 seconds to 10 seconds, and they've increased damage versus powerful PvE combatants by a whopping 50%. So you're getting more time with your hammers and even more damage with your hammers on powerful PvE enemies. Not bad at all. Next up, changes for both top and bottom tree striker. For Fists of Havoc, they've increased the slam detonation radius by 14%, reduced slam damage falloff, and reduced slam attack activation cost from 21% to 18%. Then we've got changes coming to Middletree Striker. This is the thing that had everybody worried because Curious of the Fallen Star and the Middletree Yeet Titan is something that everybody's afraid is going to get nerfed. Thankfully, they don't mention any of that here. Instead, we're getting a change to Inertia Override. They've increased the duration of this ability from 4 seconds to 6 seconds, and sliding over an ammo brick now grants you 20% melee energy. Not a bad buff there, but they do say they have more to say about the Middletree Striker in a future TWAB. Finally, for Titans, we've got changes to Top Tree Sentinel. They've increased the damage taken from bosses from 0.25x to 7x at 0 resilience, and damage taken can scale down back to that 0.25x based on your overall resilience stat. So basically, you're going to be a bit squishier with your bubbles now, unless you max out your resilience, in which case, you'll be the same as you are right now. Alright, that's it for Titans. Let's move on to Hunters. First up, Revenants. Similar to the Titan Behemoth, Bungie feels like they might have nerfed the Revenant a little bit too hard. And so, they're giving it a small buff. For Silence and Squall, they've increased Squall movement speed by 20%, and Squall Storm now stops when it touches a boss, meaning it's not just going to damage them a little bit and then move on. For Withering Blade, they've increased the projectile speed and tracking by 10%. Next up, Middletree Gunslinger. Here we see a change to Knife Trick. They've increased the burning duration from 3 seconds to 4 seconds. Not bad at all. Then we've got a change to 6-shooter on the Top Tree Gunslinger. Damage falloff now starts at 25 meters instead of 20 meters. So you're getting a bit more range back on your golden gun shots there. Next up, we've got changes coming to Arc Strider. With Arc Staff, they've extended the passive super duration from 16 seconds up to 20 seconds. Good change. They've increased the heavy slam detonation radius from 5 meters to 6 meters, and they've increased damage versus PvE combatants by 33%. All necessary changes in my opinion. Next up, for Top Tree Arc Strider, Deadly Reach is seeing a change. They've increased the duration from 8 seconds up to 10 seconds. Fantastic news. And then for the Middletree Arc Strider's Lightning Weave, dealing damage with Tempest Strike now triggers Lightning Weave, and the timer can be extended by dealing damage with any weapon. Fantastic changes all around for Arc Strider. These are the exact type of buffs I wanted to see for that particular subclass. But moving on from there, next up we've got changes to Night Stalker. And I'll be honest, I was looking for more changes to both top and bottom tree for the Void Hunters. Instead, we're just getting changes to Spectral Blades. Here's what they're doing. They've reduced the damage reduction during Super from 52% to 47%, and they've reduced the additional damage reduction when invisible from 5% to 3%. So it's a bit of a nerf for Spectral Blades. You're going to be taking more damage all around in your Super. Which is an interesting enough change, but again, I'm a little bummed we're not hearing any more about top and bottom tree for the Night Stalkers. Anyways, let's move on to the Warlocks. First up, we've got a change coming to Winter's Wrath and the Shadebinder Warlock. They've reduced the Shatter Pulse damage versus close range supers. Warlocks must now freeze and shatter twice to defeat players in Burning Maul, Fists of Havoc, Sentinel Shield, Nova Warp, Arc Staff, or Spectral Blades. Glacial Quake still only requires one shatter to defeat. Essentially, Shadebinder's gonna deal less damage to enemy supers. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who are pretty happy to hear that. Then, and something that even more people have probably been looking forward to for a long time, Top Tree Dawnblade is gonna be seeing some changes real soon. Bungie states that they want to keep this subclass as the aerial combat master, so they're doubling down on the Heat Rises ability while pulling back on some other abilities. Here's what they're changing. First up, Celestial Fire. They've reduced the tracking cone angle. The arming shape, which is proximity detonation, now shrinks over time, so the longer it travels, the less likely it's gonna detonate on the right target. They've reduced the detonation size by 1 meter, and damage falloff has been increased at short distances. Rest in peace to my traveling melee. Next up, Icarustash now provides 1 air dodge every 4 seconds, but while under the effects of Heat Rises, increased to 2 air dodges every 5 seconds. That's a pretty interesting nerf, taking away your immediate second air dodge unless you're under Heat Rises. But before I go complaining too much, Heat Rises is what we're hearing about next. They've increased the duration from 10 seconds to 15 seconds, great change. They've increased the time extension awarded for air kills while Heat Rises is active. The extension duration differs based on the type of enemy killed, and your location now appears on enemy radar when using Heat Rises. So some major changes there when it comes to that centralized perk on Top Tree Dawnblade. And while, of course, I hate seeing nerfs anywhere, even I can recognize just how dominant Top Tree Dawnblade is, and I'm interested in trying out these changes before I go complaining too much. Alright, let's talk about Middletree Dawnblade. Bungie states that they want to make Middletree Dawnblade, Well of Radiance, more effective in the Crucible, and that thinking drove some of the changes they mentioned here. First up, Well of Radiance. They've increased duration taken from bosses from 0.25x to 1.5x at 0 resilience. Damage taken can of course scale back down to that original damage reduction level based on the owner's resilience stat. And note, this refers to the Well of Radiance itself and not players inside of the well. So very similar to the Ward of Dawn, where the super itself is going to get its damage resistance based directly off of your resilience. So if you want to have the same amount of damage resistance for the Well of Radiance as you do right now, you're going to have to bump your resilience level up. Next up, they've increased the damage resistance buff versus enemy players from 20% to 40%. Players inside Well of Radiance are now immune to Stasis Freeze and Slow, and the Well Sword can now be frozen and shattered by stasis. Very interesting change there. After that, we've got changes to Guiding Flame. They've increased duration from 7 seconds to 10 seconds, and they've increased the damage buff you get with it from 20% to 25%. Really great changes there for Guiding Flame overall. After that, we've got changes to Bottom Tree Dawnblade. First up, changes to Phoenix Dive. They've reduced the delay before the dive starts, and you can now input a direction to dive in that direction. Fantastic news. And then Igniting Touch. Ability rework. Solar ability kills and kills on burning targets now cause targets to explode and burn other nearby enemies who will also explode if they happen to die while burning. Great change, more explosions, love it. After that, we see some changes targeted towards Middletree Stormcaller, Kamehameha Chaos Reach. I know a lot of people were looking for changes with this, and Chaos Reach is indeed the target of some upcoming nerfs. So let's get into it. They've increased the beam environment collision size to better match collision size with damage size, but they've reduced beam damage radius in PvP by 20% and reduced beam endpoint sphere radius in PvP by 33%. I'd imagine they're making that change so that you're not going to get killed behind quite as many walls as you do right now with Chaos Reach. It's still got a very wide berth and seems to hit even when you're hiding behind things. Interesting change. After that, we've got changes to Bottom Tree Stormcaller. First up is Arc Soul. They've increased the duration from 12 seconds to 13 seconds and increased the fire rate by 10%. Good. You got to make it compete with the Stasis turret somehow. I guess that's one way to do it. Next is Electrostatic Surge, now increases sprint speed when allies are near. And finally, Landfall now fires 5 arc ground projectiles on cast. Ooh, hopefully that bumps up the damage of that. Definitely looking forward to testing that one out. Alright, after that we've got changes to Middletree Voidwalker. This is the Nova Warp class, and I know somewhere Nim is as happy as he can be. Here's what Bungie did with it. First up, Nova Warp. They've increased the damage versus PvE combatants by 73%. Hallelujah. That super was worthless in PvE. Very happy to see that change. It now no longer slows movement speed while charging or charged, great, and now detonates on cast. Interesting to note that there weren't any PvP changes there for Nova Warp, but still, giving that massive damage buff in PvE is fantastic news. After that, changes to Handheld Supernova, the other piece of that class that really feels like it's underperforming right now. They've increased the damage versus PvE combatants by 100% and increased the hold time from 2.5 seconds to 3.2 seconds, so you can kind of keep that pocket nuke a little bit longer. But there we go, Guardians. That consists of the major Sandbox changes, ability and super changes discussed in this week's TWAB. Of course, again, these are going to be going live in Season 15, and I love that we're seeing some major buffs coming to a lot of these light-based subclasses. And while I still think there's some things that Bungie could still continue tweaking, I'm really happy to see some of this progress moving forward. Cannot wait to play with some of these changes. But in particular, when it comes to changes, Stasis abilities aren't the only thing about the Stasis class that's going to be changing. You'll also be having some different ways that you earn some of those Stasis aspects and fragments when Season 15 goes live. Here's what Bungie had to say. Starting in Season 15, our Darkness Guide on Europa, the Exo Stranger, will now reveal more information on how to complete the tasks required for earning more Stasis power. Guardians who have finished the Beyond Light campaign and visit the Exo Stranger on Europa will see the entire path for unlocking aspects and fragments. Additionally, many of the pre-requirements for obtaining and completing the Born in Darkness quest chain will be reduced or removed. Previously, Guardians needed to complete several quest chains and unlock Salvation's Grip before Stasis would grant them additional power. Guardians that completed the Beyond Light campaign will now have immediate access to the Born in Darkness quest chain from the Exo Stranger on Europa. The Exo Stranger also reveals every unowned fragment regardless of progression through the Born in Darkness questline, giving a preview of the many powers to unlock. With these improvements to messaging aimed at removing a lot of the mystery around powering up Stasis, we're excited to see more Guardians unlock Stasis's chilling power. Fantastic change. This is kind of like the New Light scenario where they dumped people into the game who had no idea where they were supposed to go after that. There are a lot of players out there who have no idea what other aspect and fragments they have to get, how they unlock those. And this, in my opinion, is a fantastic way to kind of improve the quality of life around the entire earning Stasis questline experience. But alright, Guardians, that's pretty much it for the biggest bits of news contained in this week's issue of the Bungie Weekly Blog, This Week at Bungie. A lot of stuff to cover this time around. Really interesting Sandbox information, of course. There was the Joe Blackburn Crucible information from yesterday. Plenty of things to talk about, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of it down in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed the video, feel free to drop a like, make sure you subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay up to date with all the latest stuff we're putting out. But that's going to be it for this one, Guardians. Thank you all so much for watching, and of course, as always, I am the Black Link. You Guardians, stay frosty. Hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you in the next one.